Today I'm going to remove the carburetor on the 1984 Yamaha TT600. This is a dual intake system. I've got dual ports coming off the air cleaner back in here. There's one on this side, one on that side. Take this out. I've pulled these rubber hoses out of the air filter casing. I've loosened the screws on both sides here and here, the clamps. The other thing I need to do is remove these throttle cables. These cables typically have a couple of different nuts on them, and depending on what the purpose of the cable is, it could be a tensioning setup or it could be an adjustment for the length. One of the things about this, I don't want to change the cable length or the tension on it. So this one here, as far as I can tell, is the nut that's supposed to be stationary, and this is the one that holds everything in place. I'm making that assumption just based on the fact that there's this little cutout flange which would keep this nut here from spinning. So when I loosen that and I loosen that on the end of this cable, there's going to be some type of a keyhole slot. This is going to be the end of that cable. This other one should look very similar to that. I've also noticed on this bike that throttle cable is a little sticky, and it turns out that the alignment going down this lobe here of the throttle is not perfect. So I'm going to tweak with that a little bit later on in the project. I've got everything loosened up here. That's the only thing I need to do is remove those, and then I'm going to pull that carburetor and I'm going to go through and clean it. I don't necessarily think I'm going to have to rebuild it. Typically I've had pretty good luck with just going through these, using a bunch of carburetor cleaner, spraying out all the ports, getting rid of all the old gas and the glaze that forms inside, and putting them back together. Here's the view from the other side. You can see, again, we're dealing with a dual intake system on this Yamaha carburetor. This is the port coming off the air cleaner. It sits back in here. I've just removed those so I get a little bit of play. There's a lot of room here to take this carburetor out, which is nice. That's a nice break. Here is the inline from the fuel tank. That's already been removed, and I'm cleaning that up and replacing some O-rings in there. Choke button. I'm hoping that once I remove these rubber hoses coming off the intake, the air intake, that I can release these throttle cables. Here and here I'm going to loosen those two nuts, not those two, because those adjust my length and tension on that throttle cable. If you look real close here, that throttle cable has been rubbing on the inside of this channel that works those two lobes, those arms. So that throttle is a little sticky. I'm going to see if I can adjust that after I get everything back together and maybe make that run just a little bit smoother. It hasn't worn too much. I've never had to replace a cable on there, so it's not horrible. It'll just be something that we'll see if we can fix a little bit on the reassembly. So I've got the throttle cables removed from this bracket here, and I released or loosened these top ones here, because those two nuts right there, I believe, just hold them in place. I don't want to change these ones because that'll change the action of the throttle cable. When this throttle is twisted, one of these cables is pulled and one of them is pushed. I could probably figure out which one goes where later on, but just in case, I'm going to go ahead and mark one of these cables so that when I'm putting all this back together, I don't have to think about it too hard. So I'm going to put a label here that says top on this cable here, so I can keep those organized. Now all I've got to do is reach down in here and pop out that cable. It's got a little lead on there. sometimes easier said than done. There we go. Okay. So if you look at that, this fits down in like a little keyhole slot. That's the end of the bottom cable. Top cable is going to have an attachment just like that. I'm ready to remove the carburetor. I've loosened both sides of the hose clamps here and on the other side. I've removed both of the intake hoses that come from the air cleaner. I've removed the 2 throttle cables. This is the bottom one. That one was easy to get to. The other one, this little bell actually sat behind this housing and bumped into it. So to get this one out, I simply moved the throttle, brought the cable up here, and then it gave me the clearance I needed to pull that out. So everything's loose. This thing should, all this is theoretical when you're working with these, should be able to just wiggle it a little bit, pull it straight back, maybe give it a twist, and out she comes. I won't do that on camera in case things don't go as planned. Carburetor's out. I ended up having to completely undo these clamps right here. I wasn't able to just loosen them because there's a little ridge on the inside of this rubber fitting here coming off of the engine block that corresponds to this groove here. So I had to loosen the whole thing to get that out. After that, came out pretty easily. This carburetor's got some really old gas in it and it smells real bad. I can see that some of these valves and stuff are all stuck. All the tubing on here is old, brittle, so that's all going to be replaced. And I'm going to start tearing into this and see if I can get something to work.